Mr. Chair, thank you, Administrator Pruitt. Clearly, you've had a long day, and it's not over yet, but thank you for being in front of our committee. I've had a chance to listen to a lot of the dialogue earlier this morning, and I'm not going to ask you to repeat every single question, but I do have concerns about the many things that have been raised about how you've administered the organization, some of those things that have already been brought up, some others about retaliation of whistleblowers, their housing issues, abuse of hiring authority, violations of the Hatch Act. There's really quite a list. But I have to say, I want to focus my concerns on some of the severe policy disagreements that I have with you. First off, I had hoped you'd spend a little more time defending a reasonable budget. I know my colleagues mentioned it's not easy when you're the appointee. You have a budget, you have to sort of take a little bit of what's given to you, but to have the 30% cuts, the dramatic cuts that we have actually bailed you out of, I think, twice now in the budget processes. They don't stand. Programs are being eliminated. This just couldn't possibly go on, and I'd like to see you be a little bit more rigorous in your defense. But I want to focus a little bit on a couple of issues that concern me. I have a sense that some of the appointments of this administration don't have the same view of how they should administrate the organizations as maybe some of us do, but are somewhat there to dismantle it or to look at a different purpose. And I know I hear praise on the other side of the aisle, but one of the concerns that I had was how you oversee the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And a lot of concerns have already been raised about whether you have too much of a bent towards industry, towards fossil fuels. There were concerns raised about your trip to Morocco and the idea that you were there to promote LNG sales. I can't for the life of me imagine why an EPA administrator would be over there promoting energy sales. We have a Department of Energy. You should be thinking much more about some of the challenges with LNG and why you would be on the other side.
If I may.
Quickly.
Yeah, so there's a free trade agreement. The ambassador of Morocco actually met with me in advance of a free trade agreement that was being negotiated and completed in February of this year. We were there in December to negotiate the environmental chapter. That was the focus of the trip. There was a lot of reference made to LNG only because the ambassador asked me to share that with the individuals when I was in country.
Well, it's certainly been portrayed in another way, and it certainly raised a lot of concerns. And I would not want to think that you saw yourself as promoting fossil fuels or fossil fuel sales outside the country. I'm also really concerned about how you talk about climate change. It's been widely reported that you do not agree with the issues around climate change. You call it something that's been far from settled. There's a quote from you. I think that measuring with precision human activity on the climate is something very challenging to do, and there's tremendous disagreement about the degree of impact. You've also been known to say that there are assumptions being made that because the climate is warming, that it's necessarily a bad thing. A recent article just showed that EPA staffers are given talking points to play down climate change, to say it's not clear that there's a man-made impact, to raise uncertainty. I think we could all give a tremendous number of examples why this is honest and honest faster than we ever imagined, that scientists from around the world are talking to us about this. And I thought I might just quote from a couple of letters I got actually this week. I represent the state of Maine. We are part of the Gulf of Maine, which is warming at a rate about 99% faster than the oceans around the world. Lobster fishing is critical both to our economy, to our tourism business, to our culture. I get these letters from kids who live in fishing community. There's one that said, one of the changes from climate changes is warming waters, rising sea levels, and the migration of lobsters. In around 50 years, the water level will rise and the coast of Maine will be having tropical temperatures, and there will be many new types of fish. There will also be no more native species that were once here because the global temp is going up by 1.8% Fahrenheit since 1880. Climate change is a real thing. It will affect the coast of Maine. There's another kid who said, my grandfather is a second-generation fisherman who lives on one of the islands. Every summer, my cousins come up. We always take a trip out to the island to eat lobsters and camp out. It's a tradition that I know and would like to carry on with my children, but it might not be possible. If the oceans keep warming and pushing lobsters north, there will most likely not be the same island culture that there is today. Lobster fishermen will be replaced by tourists. There'll be no reason for me to return to the island with my children. I mean, that might be through the eyes of children, but if you're not going to listen to scientists, who are you going to listen to? This is what's going on in my state. And how do I go home and tell them that the administrator of the EPA doesn't want to put resources in this, doesn't actually believe in it, and said, oh, maybe we're getting some benefit out of this? How do you defend that?
Well, as I've indicated many times, I've said it over and over again, the climate's warming and we contribute to it. But what's lost in this discussion is what authority does the EPA have to regulate? The Clean Air Act was
With all
last
due
amended
respect,
in-
I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of things, CAFE standard, clean power rule. There's a lot of things that you're rolling back actively that I think would have a huge impact if you would stay on the other side.
So there were two efforts made by the previous administration to regulate CO2, and both of them were struck down by the courts.
We'll get creative. There's a lot more we could be
they
doing.
were creative.
CAFE standards were not struck down by the courts.
But that's not the issue we're talking about here. The
Auto emissions?
tailoring rule that the previous administration adopted with respect to CO2, and then the Clean Power Plan, was stayed by the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was unprecedented. That had never happened for the U.S. Supreme Court to issue a stay while a case was pending at the lower court level.
That
So
doesn't
the-
allow
the-
us to say we're not going to deal with this issue.
I haven't said that. I can only take the steps that Congress authorizes me to take. The fault of the last administration on this issue is they tried to pinch hit for Congress. And I've taken the additional step that no previous Republican administration has actually taken. I've actually introduced an advance notice of proposed rulemaking in the marketplace to solicit comment on our authority to regulate GHG under.
Excuse me, just I want to finish my comment here. You can say that the fault is the last administration, that they didn't do it right, they were pinch hitting for Congress, but to actively deny that we are now experiencing the effect of climate change, whether it's unexpected weather, whether it's something farmers or fishermen or anyone's experiencing right now, and that we don't have to start preparing for that, and to say that there might be some benefit, which I haven't heard you justify what those benefits are, we don't have time to blame the last Congress. I want to hear some leadership out of you about what we're going to do about it.
We've actually, as a country, reduced our CO2 footprint by almost 20% from the years 2000 to 2014. There was a GHG report that recently came out that showed an additional 2% reduction.
Well, if it's
We have
going
led
down
the-
from 2000 to 2014 and you're rolling back the standards, we're not moving in the right direction.
Well, the other report recently came out, another 2% reduction, and that's largely through
Not since
innovation
you
and
got there.
technology. Actually, it was just the last couple of weeks that occurred. But
I yield back. I don't need to. I don't need to keep going on this, but I just want to be clear. I find those statements unacceptable. I can't go home and tell my district or people that I serve with or young kids in elementary school who are writing me letters that there might be some good impacts to climate change and that it's okay to do nothing about it.
Thank you, gentlelady. Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.